certainly have fears that there is a serial killer at loose in Perth.
Sarah Spiers, Jane Rimmer, Ciara Glennon.
And every time you saw a young girl walking by, you think, oh God, is she going to be the next victim?
Now, one man stands accused.
If police are right and Edwards is the Claremont serial killer, he's been hiding in plain sight for 20 years.
Today, almost a dozen witnesses recalled the night Ciara Glennon disappeared. Some remembering a woman matching Ciara's description, leaning into a car, talking to a man. The court was told one person said she might be the next girl to go. Hi everyone, welcome to week 4 of Claremont in Conversation. I'm Natalie Bonjolo, joined by the West's Tim Clarke, calling in from Supreme Court.
Hi guys.
Hello, and we've got today criminal lawyer Damien Cripps. Hello, welcome back.
Good afternoon everyone, nice to be here.
So, Tim, today was all about Ciara, and we're actually just going to start by playing listeners a short piece of audio. Now, this is from a police reenactment video which was made shortly after her disappearance in 1997.
Did you see anything that might help trace Ciara's footsteps? We do know that at around 15:15 midnight, Ciara was standing outside this computer shop on Stirling Highway. A nearby restaurant adjacent to the shop had closed for the evening. While Hungry Jack's over the road traded late as on a typical Friday, many people were in and around Claremont that night. You may have been in the area or driving along Stirling Highway towards the Bayview Terrace intersection. Did you notice Ciara in her black skirt and white fitted top with her black jacket tied around her waist and knotted at the front?
So, Tim, I guess you found out today that it turns out many people did see Ciara that night.
Yeah, and all those mentions in that video there were basically spot on. According to the witnesses that we've heard from today, we heard from a lady who actually worked in that restaurant that was mentioned in the video. We heard from a lady who actually remembered distinctly Ciara walking with the jacket around her waist, and we heard from virtually everyone describing her white top, her dark wavy hair, her black skirt, her very distinctive figure in the early hours of Claremont, and we basically plotted her exit from the Continental Hotel all the way down Bayview Terrace, turning right onto Stirling Highway, and then, as you said in your intro, Nat, this car that was seen by at least 2 people parked on the side of the road, and a young woman fitting Ciara's description, leaning inside, seemingly talking to the driver. And
I guess, so many of these people who did see this person matching Ciara's description, I suppose, with Ciara's disappearance, there was such a heightened awareness by this stage, and there was this campaign and what have you, and I guess people were taking notice. If they were in the area, they were keeping an eye out, they were looking around.
Yeah, well, that's what we've heard so far in the opening was that people were on. Well, we obviously know people were on high alert, but a lone female, an attractive lone female at that time of night alone in Claremont, did apparently draw comment and draw particular notice from various members of the public, who then, once it was evident that Ciara was missing, and that particular reenactment was done, it brought forth numerous bits of information, and once again, all these years later, all the various people that were in and around Claremont on that night, either driving or walking or drinking or being entertained, came together in one courtroom to give their memories sort of back to back, really.
Yeah.
Tim and Nat, I'm interested, not legally, but as a community member. First time I've heard that audio for a long time, and I'm not sure that would have encouraged me to ring up. If I'd seen something, it's quite dramatic, and the music's quite dramatic, and obviously with as Tim uses the phrase so well, the tyranny of time, maybe I look back on that and can't really remember what impact it had in 1997, but when I hear it now, I'm not sure that it would compel me to ring up, simply because it seems a little dramatic, and I know it's a dramatic circumstance, I understand that.
Yeah.
But if and I'm sure there were media outlets and there were police pleadings with a simple plea to, if you saw anything, contact us. But this might have been something that was done subsequent to all of those things to try to drag up memories for people, to make them think about what they'd actually done that night. Do we know, Tim, perhaps you can help us, do we get any insight into how many people were actually said that they responded to this audio?
Yeah, at least one, Damien. The first one, actually, last week, Mrs. Mabber, she specifically referenced the reenactment, and that had jogged her memory. And to jog listeners' memory, that was the lady late last week who said she'd seen a woman very much like Ciara walking down Stirling Highway, and then saw this car parked in a side road, and a fella chap stood behind that car, just a little way down the street. So she certainly said that was what jogged her memory, and that was what prompted her to ring. But the other ones today, no one specifically referenced it. But I mean, I'm sure many listeners, local listeners, will remember the absolute media frenzy that kicked off after Ciara had gone missing, which was already pretty high after Sarah and Jane's disappearance, obviously. And so I think you get the impression it was just a general sense of, on the night, people were noticing or noticed a lone woman on her own after midnight in the Claremont area, and then certainly after the news broke that Ciara was missing. It sounds like the police were absolutely inundated with pieces of information, but these 12 sightings, we had 11 today and we're going to get one more tomorrow, were the absolute sort of the peak of that information and the stuff that they basically brought together now as part of a prosecution.
I think it goes to show that people were on high alert, and that's evident from the cook who was at the Thai restaurant, who really sadly foreshadowed what was to come.
Yeah, well, it was actually her boss, so they were getting the lift home. They worked in a Thai restaurant, literally on that corner there. They just locked up for the night. The workers whose evidence was read in today, she was getting the lift home from her boss, and they basically passed this lone woman together. They'd seen her as they were sat in the car, and the boss basically commented, she's sort of got quite a revealing sort of dress on. She could be the next one to go. And if it was indeed Ciara that they saw, and we've nothing to doubt that it wasn't, then there were sort of very prophetic words, unfortunately.
And one of the other witnesses today, they yelled out at Ciara, or the person they thought resembled Ciara?
Yes, and they didn't actually say what they'd yelled out, but there was certainly something said through the window. And the three witnesses that we're expecting tomorrow, which we've discussed before, the so-called Burger Boys, we will hear, if it goes to what Miss Barbagallo opened on, that they actually yelled something across the road to her as well, something along the lines of "You're mad if you're hitchhiking," and they will describe the car that the other witnesses today described her leaning into, a sort of white station wagon that looked like a Commodore, which we've obviously heard so much about in the last 4 weeks.
Tim, Miss Mullen gave her evidence today, is that correct?
Yes, she did.
Did she get cross-examined as well, Tim?
Yes, they all did, briefly.
Tim, can I just ask, in relation to Miss Mullen, you've told us that to some extent she'd given evidence that she yelled out of the car at what someone fitting the description of Ciara had been. Did in cross-examination, even though we might not have heard about what it was that she yelled, did we find out anything about what her motivation for yelling out the car was? No,
we didn't actually, Damien. It was sort of one of those moments that we've had quite a few of during the trial that have sort of raised the question and then not really answered it. Mr. Jovich's, a lot of Paul Jovich's cross-examination today was just to sort of fine-tune a few details, maybe cross-check some sort of memories of times and exactly where they think they saw the woman that resembled Ciara. But he was, he wasn't really drilling down into major details.
What's interesting about the Miss Mullen yelling out of the car is that if you were to say that it was a gentleman yelling out of the window of the car, we might find that a little bit more understanding, and that's without being disrespectful to the men of Western Australia or visiting here.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that it's Miss Mullen that's called out of the car, and it'd be interesting to know what her motivation for that was, but we're obviously not going to find that out.
I mean, I guess if you were to speculate, you can't help but think it's someone saying something along the lines of what the Burger Boys were saying, which is, what are you doing, or why are you by yourself, or, don't you know that, girls are disappearing, or something along those lines, if you were to speculate.
Yeah, and we've also discussed previously that Ciara had only been back in the country a matter of days. The occasion that she was out on the Friday was actually, she'd only gone back to work on the Monday, and St. Patrick's Day was coming up, so it was basically a reunion sort of drinks with some of her closer colleagues. And, we have speculated that the fact that she had been out of the country for basically the whole time that certainly that Sarah and Jane had gone missing, and so whether she was totally aware or up to speed on what had been happening, and certainly the atmosphere around Perth and Claremont in particular. I suppose it is speculation, but I think it'd be fair speculation to say that she probably wasn't, given that she'd only been back in the country, a matter of days.
The witnesses who saw a young woman leaning into the car, speaking to a man, were there any descriptions of the man?
Yes, there were. In fact, there was another sketch produced today in court, Matt, by the second of those witnesses. She described how she was coming back from the movies, a movie night with her husband in Perth. They were on their way back to their home near Fremantle, and so they were taking Stirling Highway south. And they pulled off for the lights, and then there was this car that was basically in the left-hand lane, so they had to literally pull around it to get round. She was in the passenger door, so she basically said she was only like maybe a metre and a half away from the driver as they rolled slowly past, and she got a good enough look at the driver to actually then be contacted later by the police to concoct an identikit picture, which was shown in court, but hasn't been released publicly yet, so you won't see it online or in the paper tomorrow, but hopefully you might see it later in the week. The reason for that was that Justice Stephen Hall, the judge, said that because he's still got witnesses to this scene coming up, he didn't want their evidence potentially influenced by seeing this photo kit in the identikit in print, which is fair enough. So she got a very good look at him and described him as youngish, mid-20s, handsome, dark-haired. Couldn't see what he was wearing much because he was in the car. But obviously got a really good look at him, and I've got to say the photo fit that was shown in court, it was not unlike Mr. Edwards. The hair was a bit long at the back, not unlike the other sketch that has been produced in court previously.
I was wondering if it maybe looked similar to that sketch.
No, it was a little bit different to that. It was a hand-drawn one, rather than one of those sort of amalgam ones that we think the other one was. And she also got a very good look at the lady who she was convinced was Ciara, and was, had a very clear description of what she was wearing and her hair and her demeanour and build and all that type of thing. So yeah, they were given that we're talking 22 years on, from mere seconds in past midnight on a weekend. A lot of the descriptions were quite detailed.
And there was another witness who also saw her leaning into a car and talking to a man. Did that person have any descriptions of the man?
Yeah, not quite as detailed, but
Right.
but still, they were more accurate. They were more precise on what car they thought it was. They said it was certainly a white car and a Commodore type of car. They recognised particularly the lights, but they didn't see the driver so much, but did see the young woman leaning in. That first witness actually described her as almost appearing to get in, or just to get about to get into that car. And certainly was very sure that there was an interaction going on between the woman and the driver.
Damien, given there's obviously lots of description of the woman, who people presume to be Ciara, but very little of the man, what does that do for the prosecution case?
That's a difficult question to answer, Nat. I'll tell you why. Because one of the things I was thinking then when I was just listening to Tim is that in matters like this, we hear so much information about so many different people, and we get led. And Tim, I'm interested in your input on this, and I'm not going to bail out on your question, Nat. I'll come back to that. Do you feel, Tim, in the court, that when you're hearing these stories that people are telling about when they're casting their mind back to this time, does it feel like you get taken on a different journey away from what the question in issue actually is?
A little bit, Damien. But also, we've talked about it in previous podcasts. Obviously, the prosecution is trying to paint as full a picture as they can. But whether, as Tom Percy said quite pointedly last week, whether it goes to proving whether that man in that car was Mr. Edwards or not, well, that's for the judge to decide in 6 months' time. But it's certainly not a definite description. This sketch is the closest that we got to that, and obviously with 3 more witnesses to come tomorrow, we think. So does it take it on huge steps? No, but incrementally, I think it's just another few layers of circumstantial on top of the many thousands of circumstantial layers that the prosecution hoped to build over the journey.
So the issue is, in my view, if you were to say that you saw a woman fitting the description of Ciara on the night that was the night in question, I think that most people would accept that.
Yes.
If you were then to say you saw a person following behind who was a male, that eliminates, on that one account, all the females in Western Australia at the time. So now we're left with the males.
Yes.
And then we say the person was 6'1", then it eliminates all, it's such a great story to build over so many times. Mm-hmm. So in answer to your question, Nat, what I think it does is, which is not that dissimilar to what Tim had just said, that every time somebody adds something to the picture, so it's not just a male, but it's a male that's about 6'1", fitting the age, in the time at the place, all those little things keep adding to the jigsaw puzzle, increasing the likelihood that this piece does fit here. So all the while, in my view, from what we've heard so far, we've heard some descriptions about someone who was seen in and around the time that's in question, but we've heard a lot of different descriptions of a lot of different things. So I think what Tim is saying is right, that the person who's making the decision has to take on board what they can, and in 6 months' time accumulate all that together and weigh up whether there's a reasonable doubt or whether it's overwhelming. It's not an easy job to do.
Well, it's the missing pieces of the jigsaw puzzle that make it difficult, right? Not the pieces you can find.
It's the missing pieces of the jigsaw puzzle that create reasonable doubt.
Yes.
And that, there's amongst other things, but if and obviously I haven't been there at the trial, listening like Tim has, and he's our first-hand information, and has been doing a magnificent job, I must say, Tim, keeping me up to speed as well. Thank you for that. Probably half of Western Australia, most of Australia, and around the world.
Around the world he is.
He has done an astounding job, and I've got to say, this is not just to build him up, but I have been astounded with his ability to get all this information and translate it into terms that people can understand and actually utilise, me included, Tim. So well done.
No, that's all right. It's giving me a headache some nights, but that's what,
I'm sure it has.
That's what we're here for.
You love it. He actually really loves it. You can tell in the way that you detail you go into. So, right to go back to the answer to the question, that I think that there's always going to be a problem if for a prosecution trying to put together a case in these circumstances. But I don't think that there's any issue about that. I think that, that it's a difficult job, and that's why certain people get that job.
So, not only did you have these multiple witnesses coming through the court today, you also heard a lot of written statements were read into the court as well. Did it feel today as though you were almost, tying up some of the loose ends?
Yeah, I think we were made aware at the end of last week that we're definitely getting towards the end of the so-called civilian witnesses. So that's witnesses that aren't police, that aren't experts, that aren't doctors. And they were basically wrapping up a few things today. So, for instance, we heard from a couple of workers, bank workers, talking about Sarah's bank accounts and the last withdrawals that she made from her account, and also from a passport person that basically confirmed that Sarah hadn't left the country after the 26th of January. Yep. We heard from the father of the Huntingdale victim and his description of what had happened on that night, the fact that he'd woken up to screams. He was so shocked that he ran into the door of his daughter's bedroom because it had been closed, and it never was closed, and he was in such a hurry to get there that he ran into it. We heard from a person who started their apprenticeship with Bradley Edwards at Telstra, and describing how they were both issued these knives that we think are going to become quite crucial a little bit later down the track.
So this was a knife that was in their toolbox that they were given as an apprentice?
Yes, correct. So as Telstra apprentices, don't know if it happens now, but it certainly happened then, that they were given the tools of the trade. They were given a toolbox, and one of the tools in that box was a knife, a green-handled knife they were originally given. This is back in sort of 86, 87. But then about 8 weeks later, that knife was recalled because apparently it was too sharp, it was too pointy. And so they were then given a different type of knife, which is this wooden-handled knife that we've heard a little bit about and we're going to hear a lot more about. And he described how this knife looked and how long it was. And there were two different actual types of this wooden-handled knife. Mm-hmm. And the second type that he described was the same as the type of knife that was basically found on the road, the same road, on the same day that Jane's body was discovered.
In Dallas, yep.
Yes. So that was basically an establishment sort of statement. Yes, yep. This is where we got these knives, this is when we got these knives, this is how we got these knives. And then later on, after Christmas, when we get to the discovery of Jane's body, Miss Barbara Gallo said there's going to be a lot more evidence about this actual knife that was discovered on the road and how it compares.
Now, they were issued with a second knife because the first one was too sharp, as you said. Did they have to hand that first one back in?
Yes, well, apparently they did. But interestingly, this fellow apprentice of Mr. Edwards, described how he remembered that Mr. Edwards had said that he'd lost his early issue knife, his first issue knife, and he couldn't find it. He couldn't, so it needed to be replaced. But so that was just an interesting tidbit, but not one that goes to the heart of the case, because we know that it was a different type. It was a different type of knife that was found at the scene. So whatever happened to that knife? Once again, another question that probably never be answered.
In 1990, obviously there was the Hollywood Hospital incident, and today you also had a statement read into the court by the security guard who detained Edwards after that assault.
Yes, correct, and that was probably the most interesting of all the statements that were read in this afternoon. So this was the security guard that had worked at Hollywood Hospital, or did work at Hollywood Hospital for 20 years, which spanned 1990, which is when this incident with Edwards occurred, when he grabbed the lady from behind, tried to drag her into the toilet cubicle. And this security guard basically described how he'd answered the emergency call, came running, found the woman and a staff member together, both distressed, and then went into a little ante-room and found Edwards basically with his head in his hands, sat on a padded bench, mumbling to himself that he didn't know why he did it, and he didn't know what he was going to do with himself. And it was quite a vivid sort of remembrance of how he'd come across Edwards and how Edwards was at the time. That he'd basically been caught red-handed, or as good as red-handed. And the last sort of portion of the statement was that Edwards was basically saying to the security guard, "What am I going to do? What am I going to do about work?" And the security guard basically saying, "Mate, that's the least of your worries." And as it turned out, it wasn't, because we know that he was able to get the charge or dealt with within a week, and was back at work.
That's
the week
right.
After that, so.
And of course, we also know that incident is nowhere on his record, on his work record.
There doesn't appear to be any official Telstra or Telecom records detailing that they were aware of that, which may be a more a record keeping, bookkeeping thing than the actuality of it. Once again, we don't know whether we'll find out is unclear. But what was clear was that Edwards was obviously distressed and distraught at what he'd done. But reading between the lines of that security guard's statement, it would appear that his sort of one of his first thoughts was himself and what was going to happen to his employment, rather than what had happened to his victims. So yeah, that was just another interesting window into that particular incident in 1990.
Okay, so I guess you'll get a few more of these sorts of statements tomorrow, and we may very well be wrapping up this lot.
Yes, well, that's what we were informed this afternoon, that it could be the final sitting day before Christmas tomorrow. They've rattled through the witnesses, all these witnesses, over 100 now we've counted, over 4 weeks, which is, I'm sure Damien will agree, is a absolute world record pace for a murder trial.
I've been astounded, Tim. I had to have gotten where we've gotten to now.
Yeah.
After, is it 3 weeks?
Yeah, 3 weeks and 1 day.
3 weeks and 1 day, yes.
It's unbelievable. But it's good. It's good for the state, and it's good for the families, the people that are looking for the answers. So there's good progress being made.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the prosecution and the defence, to be fair, have really tried to get as many of the civilian witnesses done as quickly as they can. For all manner of reasons. You don't want witnesses hanging around court day after day after day. You don't want to have the stress of having a court sort of summons hanging over the holiday period, particularly for witnesses close to the victims. And so we've rattled through them. So tomorrow could be the last sitting day. The judge has already agreed that we won't then get into the more forensic stuff, which is basically going to be concerning the discovery of Jane and Ciara's bodies, the post-mortems, and then the forensic detail around those. We're not going to get into those until after Christmas. It was Mr. Jovich's sort of gentle suggestion that maybe they'd be better starting afresh, and the judge was quite willing to accommodate that.
Okay, well, a couple of listeners' questions before we go. These are for you, Damien. So one listener would like to ask, assuming Bradley Edwards is acquitted of all 3 murders, if in the future the body of Sarah Spiers is discovered with definitive new evidence linking the murder to the acquitted Bradley Edwards, could he be tried a second time for Sarah Spiers' murder?
It's a fantastic question. And I'm sure anyone listening to the cast will now have the cogs in their mind turning over, because we've got so many Hollywood stories about,
we're thinking double jeopardy, right?
Of course, which is not actually legally something that we look at the same here. It's a little bit different. But from what my understanding would be in this circumstance, there would be applications made, because that would be a significant find, I would have thought.
Yes.
It would be difficult to explain to the people of Western Australia, this person's been acquitted of this, but now we've found this evidence. So I would have thought that there would have been applications made by the prosecution in that sense. And I have to say, I've never been in this situation. It would be an unusual situation to be in. Not something I've considered till I've seen this question today. But I think the answer to the question would be, even though the applications could be made and a lot of arguments would be made about it, it would be unlikely, in my view, that you'd be able to have that trial again. Now I don't know, Nat, your vocabulary is pretty good. Do you think that you can pronounce, is it a little bit of French or a bit of Latin in that?
Oh, probably not.
Tim probably knows what that word is.
You read it out for us.
I'll have a try. So what this word is, Tim, is essentially saying that once you've been acquitted, you can't be asked to come back and answer the same the charge or tried for the same offence again. Autrefois acquit. Which is Latin for the same thing. So it's certainly something that poses a significant question because on the face of it, when I first read that question, I would have thought an application could be made. It's definitive new evidence, but in the course of the cast, I've had the opportunity to do a little bit of research, and I think that given that principle, it might be very difficult for them.
Yeah, there is the legal capability, though, isn't there, Damien? If compelling new evidence does arise, then there is the possibility.
He's shrugging his shoulders here, Tim. He's not sure.
Well, no, it's Tim. Because what I would say to you about that is, if you think about it, you might be in a position where you say, if that was the case, and it's just my view and my opinion. Based on a little bit of research that I've done, wouldn't it be the case that the prosecution should have had all of these things in order before they brought the charge? That's potentially the principle that causes some... Yeah. And I understand that logistically, that's just not possible at the moment because we don't have it. But the question, at some point the prosecution have to say, OK, well, we think we've got enough and we think we've got everything that we're ever going to have, so we should run the case.
Yeah.
But if this gentleman was acquitted, and what I should say about that too, Nat, is an acquittal in the true sense of the word means that the prosecution's been unsuccessful in proving beyond a reasonable doubt what they're alleging. So if they were unsuccessful in reaching that threshold, then should this person continually be able to just be brought back before the courts every time something new arises?
Yes.
And that's difficult. That's why it's such a great question, because there's a body of work that would have to go along with dealing with that situation when it arose. But there's a couple of things for all the listeners to consider there. The first thing is that there's a principle that says once you've been tried or you've pled or you've been acquitted of something, you shouldn't be able to be brought back and be tried on it again. But like Tim says, that there is a legal process that someone could go through to make that application. And that'll be just something really, really great for the listeners to consider until the next podcast.
Definitely. Well, we've got one more for you, actually. Would Justice Hall have read into the fact that Edwards originally pleaded not guilty to Huntingdale and Karrakatta, but pleaded guilty to them before the trial started?
That's another really, really good question, Nat. And now, look, the English language, as fantastic it is, sometimes plays tricks on us. Would Justice Hall read into the fact that Edwards originally pleaded not guilty? What I take from that, just to clarify for the listeners, is would Justice Hall take into his consideration in determining the outcome of this trial, the fact that Edwards had originally pleaded not guilty to the Huntingdale and Karrakatta matters? The answer to that question has to be no. It has to be no, because he is charged with considering these matters as standalone matters. However, there's a number of legal principles that Tim has been talking about throughout the course of propensity evidence plays into it. But it's within there's a number of reasons why somebody can plead not guilty, and there's a number of reasons and bases that they can do that. So I think that, as I've said before, of all of the people that I've encountered, Justice Hall would be one of the best people that to deal with this. Not that it's my decision or I'm not charged with putting someone in that position, but he is probably the only person that can answer that question. It's such a great question because in every court case that I ever deal with, one of the things that I'm always challenged about is, am I confident that the people around me can set aside and compartmentalise that and leave it alone to make the decision about that they need to do. And I think that what people have to do is be confident that that's the job that people might be charged with, and they'll be able to achieve that.
Yeah.
The question seems to me to be whether the fact that the accused person had originally pleaded not guilty to the Huntingdale and Karrakatta matters would have an impact on the judiciary's decision about them in relation to his guilt or otherwise of the three charges before him. And my view on that would be that it's not relevant, because he's pleaded guilty to those charges and they're separate and matters. The only thing that really can come before the court for consideration in relation to that is the propensity issue, which we've talked about before, in that his propensity to do things that might be similar, not his pleading guilty or otherwise. So essentially, the bottom line would stand that he's pleaded not guilty to these charges that are before the court at the moment, and that's what's being dealt with.
Yes.
So
we have been asked questions as to whether legal tactics are used and what have you.
So tactics an interesting proposition, because we're always talking tactics, and tactics are essentially about us getting our clients to be in the best position that they can possibly be in, given the circumstances that they're in. So it's a tactic to say, let's not have this matter come before this court without the other matter, because together we'll get consideration for them both together. There's a number of tactics. My view is, and obviously I don't know because I'm not part of that team, I don't have anything to do with, I wouldn't have thought this was a tactic. I would have thought this would have been something that was carefully considered, and on advice from counsel, would have been the result and where that ended up.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, listeners, for those very difficult questions, and thank you both for doing your best to answer them. Appreciating all your hard work there and appreciating all the feedback that we're getting. So back in court tomorrow for Tim. We'll see you in a couple of weeks, Damien, after the Christmas break for court. And we look forward to chatting to you all tomorrow for day 17 of Claremont in Conversation. We'll talk to you then.
This podcast was hosted by Natalie Bongiorlo, produced by Kate Ryan and Alicia Preedy, and recorded in the studios of 7 West Media. Audio files were provided from the archives of the 7 Network and the West Australian. Sign up for daily emails and all the latest on the Claremont trial at thewest.com.au.
Enjoying this podcast? If the story behind the headline matters to you, then you can count on thewest.com.au to deliver. For more on Claremont the trial, follow the live blog, watch the nightly news updates, and sign up for daily email updates at thewest.com.au. Subscribe now for just $1 a day at thewest.com.au.